Suzuki Satoru could see a city ahead of him. He had heard about it through rumors, but it was quite a large walled city. Large in this case did not refer to scale, but in a literal sense, the physical buildings and city walls were very large. A particular note was the massive rocks to either side of the gates. They were roughly 150 meters tall or so. The rocks that were placed on either side of it had become part of the city wall. The city walls had not been built because they had been located next to those rocks. Rather, the giants who lived nearby had delivered them from their homes as a sign of friendship. After that, thanks to the friendly relations with those giants, every part of the city, like say, the buildings, the urban layout, and so on, were sized, so that the giants would not have to undergo discomfort, or at least that was what Suzuki Satoru had heard. How many giants had it taken to ship it over, and how had they done it? As Suzuki Satoru considered the matter with growing interest, he indicated to the hooded Kino that she should change the rings she was wearing. As a vampire, Kino suffered a penalty to all actions under sunlight. However, she had managed to negate that by wearing an anti-sunlight ring. The indication was for her to change it to something else. Even wearing a hood would not negate the penalty, and she would still feel tired, but things would be troublesome as she could not endure just that tiny bit. He had lent 4 rings to Kino. A ring of reducing sunlight exposure penalties, a ring of proof against undead control and banishment, so even Suzuki Satoru could not dominate her, a ring of proof against divination magic, and a ring of immunity to bindings and other movement impediments. He would give her others depending on the circumstances. This time around, she would be putting on the ring of proof against undead control and banishment, and the ring of proof against divination magic, both of which were very important when entering cities. In contrast, Suzuki Satoru made no attempt to hide his bony visage. After all, one could say that he had been training to enter cities with his face exposed during his 5 years of traveling. Also, he had been told that it would be better to show his true face when trying to enter cities. If he was forthright and did not try to hide himself, it would be easier to bluff his way through. He had tried using illusions to camouflage himself before, but after an unhappy accident, he no longer relied on them. Speaking of which, Satoru. Why are we coming back this way? Kino's homeland was only a little further beyond this place. Satoru had not brought her here during the past 5 years. We've been all over the world, but we haven't come here, have we? Wouldn't it be good to climb those mountains we can barely make out in the distance? I see. It would seem that Kino did not quite believe that explanation, given her tone. Suzuki Satoru could tell given that they had spent 5 years traveling together. However, he had no intention of telling Kino the reason for coming to this city. The golem horse-drawn wagon carried the 2 of them to the main gate without slowing down. Perhaps they had good timing, but there was nobody there except Suzuki Satoru and company. The gate guards were assembled, and there was danger in the air. Everyone had their spears ready. He glanced to the walls and saw the archers assembled there. Needless to say, they were all wary of Suzuki Satoru. Halt. A stern voice called out to them. It seemed to belong to some sort of guard captain. Suzuki Satoru nonchalantly ignored it and replied in a bright, cheerful tone. Yo, nice weather we're having. Confusion immediately spread throughout the guards, but they soon resumed their stern demeanor. What are you doing here, undead? The undead. Where? Suzuki Satoru looked around, as though on purpose. What nonsense are you? Could it be that you've mistaken me for one of the undead? He interrupted the soldiers' cries and shouted back at them. I'm not undead. I'm Satoru the Old Bone. Old Bone. The soldiers looked at each other and then they shook their heads. He could hear them asking each other, have you heard of them before? As if, this is the first time I've heard this. Don't you think it's very rude to mistake one of the glorious old bones for an undead creature? It is a grave insult to our nation. The gate guards looked at each other again. The captain, that would be his name for now, replied in a very confused tone. However, he showed no sign of lowering his weapon. Still, that was only to be expected. You mean, you're not undead? I told you, didn't I? I'm Satoru, of the glorious old bones. No, my apologies. Forgive my ignorance, but I've never heard of the name Old Bone before. What? You don't even know of the great and mighty Old Bones? What kind of hick town is this anyway? The proud gate guards naturally took offense to being dismissed as hicks. While they were unhappy with this, it would seem they had eased off greatly in their caution. There were many races in this world. Humanoids aside, there were also many demi-humans and heteromorphs with bizarre appearances. Discriminating against members of those races might incur the ire of their nations. If that led to a war, it might result in the extinction of one party. In fact, several countries had been destroyed that way. For that reason, gate guards had been asked to respond appropriately to the situation. The more species that a nation made contact with, the more intensively that nation's guards would be trained. In other words, they would not act rashly if they thought he was not undead, but part of the Old Bone race. After that, taking advantage of their confusion and seizing control of the situation would be key. It seems I need to let you ignorant hicks know of the greatness of us Old Bones. Like I said before, I am Satoru, hailing from Rutakyo, the great capital of the Old Bones. I have come here to find something of value, although I don't think there's anything great here which will catch my eye. Are you a trader? Indeed I am. That said, I won't buy anything if nothing catches my eye. We need to check your luggage first, but before that, we really need to, what's that? Check you out. You understand, right? If you do, then, please wait there. I'll go get the priest. The captain's tone gradually segued into one giving in to Suzuki Satoru. I understand. Well, I was wondering exactly what kind of primitives you were to mistake the old bones for the undead. We are very magnanimous. And that girl over there is. She is my companion, and also an old bone. Ha. The captain looked at Kino in shock, and then began comparing her to Satoru. He could be heard muttering questions like, he says she's an old bone. And, they're completely different, right? Very similar, no. The captain was looking down in what seemed to be embarrassment. Soon, Suzuki Satoru could see a soldier bringing a priest over. He was a fat man who looked like just running a little bit would put him out of breath. After he arrived, the priest wiped his sweat away with a handkerchief and panted heavily, like he was struggling for breath. The captain said, "Excuse me," and went over to the priest. "Priest Dono, thank you for taking the trouble to come all the way out here." "What are you saying, Captain Dono? This is our duty. That said, I hope you won't rush me so much next time. I don't want to be dragged before the throne of the gods before I arrive here." The priest's breaths were like sobs as he replied. The two of them had done their best to quiet themselves, and they were some distance away, but Suzuki Satoru could still hear them. "Still, aren't there horses at the temple?" "What are you saying, Captain Dono? Wouldn't you feel sorry for any horse I rode?" "Priest Dono, it might be better for you to learn to ride. It'll hurt my butt and thighs, so I'll pass, if you don't mind," the priest said as he ignored the captain's reply of, "But you have healing magic," and stared at Suzuki Satoru. "Very well, I shall do what I was called here to do. Turn on." "No, those people claim to be old bones. They don't seem to be undead." "Ha, old bones. But they look like undead to me." "Are they? However, things will get really troublesome if they really aren't undead." Alright. After all, it would be bad if I chase away people who might donate to our temple, and who knows how the higher-ups will censure me. If I ended up becoming a village priest then, ahem. "No, that's not the problem, Priest Dono. No, that is the problem, Captain Dono. This place lies within the Marquis's domain. Even if he's given us some degree of autonomy, we will still suffer if we act on our own, without regard for the nation's interests. Moreover, the incident will blow up if we offend someone who happens to be a high-ranking member of another race. Captain Dono, I trust you don't want your name to go down in history as the fool who started a war that led to the destruction of the nation, do you? I, of course, will pass on that. In addition, should such a thing come to pass, it would also cause all sorts of trouble for everyone else too. So you do get it. Therefore, could I trouble you to check whether or not they actually are undead? It's very troublesome, so can't you just let them go? Have some soldier keep an eye on them while pretending to be an escort or something." The two of them exchanged looks, and in the end, the priest rounded his shoulders in defeat. Fine, I get it." As the priest grumbled about having to cast a spell for free, he walked up to Suzuki Satoru, and then greeted him with a cheery smile. "Greetings, honored old bone guests. I am a servant of the temple in this city. Well, I believe your words. I need to cast a spell in order to allay the doubts of others. I pray you do not resist it." The fact that he had not even stated his name showed exactly how desperate he was to avoid trouble. One could say it was exactly as Suzuki Satoru had planned. "I understand. Please proceed, Priest Dono." "Detect undead. I see. Indeed, he is not undead, Captain Dono, being that there was no reaction to it. Also, weird." The priest raised his hand. Suzuki felt a strange force pushing on him. It was probably some kind of undead destroying ability. However, it was completely ineffective on Suzuki Satoru and Kino. While the difference in their levels was part of it, the main reason was thanks to their magic items. As I thought, there was no reaction. This man is not an undead creature. Really? I told you, didn't I? I am Satoru of the Old Bones. Treating me as undead is quite frustrating. He saw the guards around him lower their spears. They still surrounded him, but there was no longer any tension in the air. "This means I've discharged my duty, right? Where would you find such a calm and friendly undead being? I was already thinking that he couldn't possibly be undead before coming here," the priest said as he glanced at all the guards. "And yet you still called me here. I can only think of this as you trying to abuse me." The priest ended in a joking tone. The captain looked at his men and replied in a similarly light-hearted fashion. "Well done on making the priest Dono run down here. I've always felt that there was a problem with his size. Continue taking the chance to make him run like this in the future." The captain and the priest had a good laugh. It was a kind of laugh that sounded like they were grinding their teeth, like they were actually thinking of something else.